we bring in a friend who we've known for years and years and years. He's an author, relationship therapist, Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson.
Some expert advice on how we can all talk to them. Joining us now is relationship expert Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson. She's the author of Courageous Conversations Connect. Good morning, R.G.
Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Janelle. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And as we mentioned, a lot of people just dealing with anxiety during all of this. What are your suggestions?
Some of the things that we need to remember is that this is temporary. This is temporary inconvenience for long-term gain. And as long as we stay healthy, Janelle, then everything else is recoverable.
Talk to your children about what's happening right now. What are the best ways to do that?
There's some do's and don'ts, right? So you want to tell them that you're going to be here. We're going to be okay. Kids want to know that they're secure and they're safe. So predictability, structure, and consistency. You also want to let them know you have a plan. And even if you don't have a plan, tell them that you're working on one.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. This is yours truly, Dr. R.G. Alan Wilson, and this is the Courageous Conversations Connect space where we're having our quarantine talks. This is our community give back, and boy, do we have a show for you. So listen, what I want you guys to do, you know the deal. This is our crew, Connecting Relationships for Epic Wins. So tag a friend, share this video, go on over to our YouTube page at Ask Dr. RG, AskDrArgie. Subscribe to the page, the channel, and hit the notification bell. And also, as Morgan said yesterday, type subscribe in the message section if you're on Facebook so that you can get notifications of everything that we're doing on not the channel, the page, the page. And so, listen, all this week we've been talking about racial healing. That's our topic for the week, right? And so I already see that Joe Budd is on, Larissa's on, China. I see Roger, Charla. So welcome to the show. Let everybody else that know let them know that we are on. We are on here this morning, and we have somebody that's very special to me, my good friend and my pastor, the Reverend Dr. Alan E. Waller, will be on just in a few short moments to really talk about the topic of what the Black church has to say about these two viruses that we're dealing with. COVID-19, for a couple of months, we've been dealing with that. And systemic racism, the structural inequities, the social injustices that we've been dealing with that have plagued our society for 401 years. It's fitting that we are celebrating Juneteenth tomorrow. And so he's going to talk about that. We're going to have a courageous conversation. So you all know what we do. Put in the chat who you're going to be breathing for, who you're breathing for. You know who I'm breathing for. And I'll tell you when we come back. We're going to take a quick break from our sponsors. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Well, good morning. I saw my pastor bopping his head. He must like the music. So listen, this is Dr. RG here, and we are here for our Courageous Conversations Connect space where our crew has our quarantine talks. About 14 weeks ago, Morgan and I thought, what can we do to give back? We were in the house, we were quarantined. This is a 14th week in quarantine. Today marks the 50th episode on June 18th, 2020, the 50th episode of Quarantine Talks. And this is our way of creating a safe space for us to process all the crazy things that are going on in the world. And so without further ado, it's like 10:05. I'm going to bring on somebody who is very dear and near to me. Pastor Waller, I call him Rev. So many people have different names for him, but for me, he came into this space, really Philadelphia space, many years ago when we were all in our 20s and trying to figure things out. And We'll talk a little bit about the special story of kind of craziness, how we connected through the death of a family member. And so at that particular time, we began our journey with regards to mental health. But he is so more to so many other people. He is a leader in our community, in our faith-based community. He is an extraordinary and anointed pastor and revivalist. And he is simply, for me, just my friend. And so without further ado, I'd like to bring to the conversation Pastor Alan E. Waller, Senior Pastor of Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. Thank you for joining us.
How are you? How are you and Morgan? Good?
We are good. We are good.
We're good, Pastor. How are you, sir?
I am
How are
great.
you, sir?
I am
Absolutely.
great, man.
Absolutely.
Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation, this courageous conversation this morning.
No, thank you for your presence. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. So listen, Rev, let's just get right into it. One of the things we do in the beginning of our courageous conversation and our quarantine talks is we breathe. We started this 14 weeks ago because we found out that when people were getting COVID, and I want you to share your experience as well, we found that many people couldn't breathe, that the virus was affecting their respiratory system. And so we started breathing for the essential workers and the medical care professionals and the mental health workers and the people that had to be out there and fighting this fight. And now we've shifted. And so we're not just breathing for those essential workers, but we're breathing for all those Black and brown people that can't breathe. Many of us, quite frankly, not them, us, who have had difficulty breathing for hundreds of years, not just in the streets, but in the suites. So we ask our crew, who are you breathing for today? I am breathing for the families of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, of Ahmaud Arbery, and now of Rayshard Brooks. So who would you be breathing for today?
Wow, I am breathing for all of those who have really taken up the mantle today to stay in this fight for freedom and for justice. The young people with Black Lives Matter, the unheard voices that are really doing the hard work of carrying the agenda forward. You know, in the grand scheme of things, the easy stuff was last week, having the marches and all of that. But the real hard work of concretizing the dreams and visions of last week, I'm breathing for those persons who are ready to do the work.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And for Roger and Charles on and Debbie and Diane and Treasure, China, Larissa, please also our IG family, you guys share this with everyone, tag a friend, share it with your community. We're in a crew. Tell us who you're breathing for. This is what we do. We kind of get in our postures, Rev, right? We either put our middle finger to our thumb or our hands, one hand over the other on our laps or on the side like this. And at the sound of my voice, we breathe in 5 times. We're breathing in oxygen and we're breathing out carbon dioxide, but we're also breathing in peace and serenity and love and care and hope and freedom. And we're breathing out worry and fear and discontent and anger and rage, because we know that, and I heard you say this in one of your sermons, if we stay angry, we can't stay in the fight. We have to let those emotions out and we have to express them in order for us to be healthy. Joe says, I'm breathing for our youth, especially our young men. Larissa says, I'm breathing for my sick grandson, Roger, and mother who lost their children. So, all right, let's do this. The sound of my voice. And we're going to hold it, by the way, 8 seconds in honor of the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that George Floyd was under duress due to this white police officer's knee on his neck. 1, 2, 3, 3. Breathe in through the nose. And out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. One last time, make it count, guys. Breathe in. And out. I encourage everybody in the crew, Rev, to do this throughout the day, because what I'm experiencing in the work that I do, because once we do the show, I transition at 12 o'clock and I'm rolling, doing therapy online until sometimes 9 o'clock at night, and everyone is so anxious. There's that level of stress that's been on fleek for most of us that have been quarantined in the house, but also having the level of stressors. So I heard you say in the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic that the stuff that we had hidden from because we were so busy out there working, we had to now start dealing with. We had to deal with ourselves. We had to deal with our own drama, our own trauma, our own conflict. And that created a little bit more anxiety, maybe even a lot more anxiety. Good morning, Belva Lily. She says, good morning, family, and my Reverend Dr. Alan E. Waller. So, Rev, I want to hear from you, your perspective as a pastor, what you're hearing on the ground around the anxiety that many people are dealing with, and specifically, if you could speak to families and the children of how they're dealing with the trauma, not only of COVID-19 and the elevated deaths and illnesses, which they say we're going to have a second wave of this, but also the trauma of the systemic racism and injustices that we've been dealing with forever. But now white people are starting to speak up as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there are a number of issues that people are dealing with, and it fundamentally, the anxiety and stress comes out of the unknown. I mean, if you really dig underneath it, with COVID-19, everything has changed. Everything has shifted. What we have known is no more for now. How we go to church, how we go to work, how we interact with people, all of that is unknown. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And so much of it has to do with the poor national leadership that we've dealt with. As we watch all around the world, as different countries begin to come out of this, and the reason that we're going deeper into it is because, quite frankly, from the very beginning, our national leadership was just wrong and continues to be wrong. So there's a lot of unknown. How long is this going to last? Where am I going to work? Where are my children going to go to school? How are they going to go to school? How am I going to be related to other people? So it's stemming out of that. I think for those of us who are a little older, the race thing, I mean, we've seen this before. It's a new experience for a lot of white people. And welcome to the party. But we've seen this. If you're in your 50s, we were children, but we lived this before. And we know what the pieces are and what needs to come next. What hopefully we are going to do is the rest of the work and learn from our generation and how we were raised, what we need to do. Because I would argue that the gap between the millennials and the civil rights movement people centers on us, because we raised the millennials. Mm-hmm. And there were some fundamental mistakes we made in raising the millennials to almost believe that the coast was clear. So when this thing hit, that not only was there anger, but surprise. And there's some other stuff that the younger people are really wrestling with. And their disorientation also has to do with how parenting in our generation really defanged our children. For this racist country that we live in. So we've got a lot of work to do internally. And when I said that there's no light at the end of the tunnel, I really meant that from a fleshly systems approach. It seems that there's no end in sight. But for those of us who view this through the eyes of our spirit, for those of us who know God, who know the end of the book, we know we're going to be all right. And we know it's going to come out right. And so that's what I'm trying to lift up in this season. I'm trying to lift up just 1 week ago when I talked about what about the children. I remember being 4 years old when all this stuff was going on. I remember.
He's frozen. No, he's frozen. Hopefully he'll come back. Okay, so while we're waiting, I hope that you guys tell me on your end, do you see Rev still talking or do you see him frozen? I think he's frozen. He started saying, I remember being 4 years old during
Martin Luther King.
Oh, there you go. Wait a minute. You are freezing up. Let me text him. He's frozen. Yeah, he's frozen. He's frozen. Let me text him. Tell him he's frozen. You're frozen. He may have to come back in. Frozen. All right. So in the meantime, while he's coming out, he's going to come out and come back in. This conversation with children, we can all hearken back to when we were younger and what we were thinking. And Rev is right to a certain degree. Those millennials, we raised them to think that the coast was clear when in actuality it's not. And I think that that's where a lot of of the young people's rage is coming from. They're like, wait a minute, I thought we were okay. And now we're finding out that we're not. And so there's a lesson to be learned, I believe, from the past when we think about what is it that we need to be teaching our children to prepare them. I believe that, Rev has a ministry that he really, I think, created and actually, really oversees more than maybe some of the other ones regarding the young Abrahams, I believe. He's back on there. Yeah. I see him in the background, though. Can you bring him to the foreground? There we go. There you go. There you go. There you go. You froze up on us a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know what happened with that, so I went to my trusty other.
Okay. All right. No worries. So you were saying you remember being 4 years old.
Right. So I remember all of that, and I remember the fear that I had. I mean, I'd never seen my father cry before. And so watching my father cry, realizing that he's crying because of what happened to the man whose lap I sat on. And
Martin Luther King, everybody doesn't know that you sat on Martin Luther King's lap as a little boy, right?
Right. And so I've always had that picture, and the Enon folk have seen that picture, and I preached about that because it's, Maya Angelou was right when she said, we may not remember what people say and what they do, but we do remember how they make us feel. We remember feelings. And I think we need to realize that our children are feeling things. You know this as a marriage counselor, as much as parents try to hide the argument, they feel it if they don't see it. They feel it in the way you told them to go upstairs so you could finish this argument. And our children are feeling this. And right now we need to be having frank conversations with them, and frank conversation about what really is going on. And also frank conversations about the importance of God in their life. I heard you talking about the young Abrahams as I was coming back in. The reason we started the young Abrahams, they are 7 to 9 year old Black boys. And that is because statistically speaking, 7 to 9 year old Black boys begin to receive the messages in society, in the educational realm, that they are not preferred. They are not white and they are not female. They begin, because white people have not been having these conversations, they pass on their stuff about Black male stuff onto their children, even if they think they don't. And 7, 8, 9 year old Black boys begin to find that their white friends treat them differently. They begin to find out that public education and education in general prefers a female learner as opposed to a male learner. And they find out that society puts them on the low end of the totem pole. So in young Abrahams, we take them and say, listen, you are absolutely one of the greatest creations that God ever made. And so that's what we're really talking about with them. So I say all that to say this is a moment where we have to really lean into our parenting, lean into our conversations in the community. And I like the writings of a young man named Matthew Kay. He's actually a math teacher here in Philadelphia Public School System. Has written the book, Not Light, But Fire. And he talks about courageous conversations on race. And he also talks about how this is a moment where we as Black people don't need to be defining ourselves by our relatedness to white people. This is a time for us to have conversations about what it means to be Black within context of our own community, because at the end of the day, it is not whether white people put their knee on our neck, it's whether we bend over to where their knee can get there. And so we're going to have to talk about what does it look like to stand up. And I believe that that's what these conversations are about. And there's an interracial conversation to be had, but not yet. Right now is a wonderful time for us to really affirm what it means to be Black in all of its expressions. We are Black and African. We are Black and Caribbean. We are Black and African American. We are Black and privileged. We are Black and impoverished. And we got to have those conversations because there's an internal fight that is going to wound us for the external struggle that we are getting ready to face.
Yeah, I agree. You know, my mentor, Dr. Marlene Watson, has a book called Facing the Black Shadow. And she's actually working on one called Facing the White Shadow. But she talks specifically in Facing the Black Shadow about the internalized racism and the ways in which we've taken that external message and internalized it to then mean to us that we are not worthy, that we are not enough, that we're not valuable, if you will. And it's interesting, Rev, that last week I got the opportunity to speak to the Senate. It was my first testimony to the Senate about what I thought I could bring to the table regarding the mental health and well-being of Black and brown people, specifically related to why the death rate had escalated disproportionately for Black and brown people who got COVID-19. Yeah. And I called my mentor and I said, you know, I'm a little nervous. I've never done this before. And she said, don't listen to the Black Shadow. You have everything you need to state how it is, what God gave you with regards to the work that you've been doing for almost 30 years. And it's very similar to a message that you and I have talked many times when I've gotten an opportunity to do something that maybe, you know, I was a little nervous about, and you sort of said the same thing. I remember those conversations more when we both of us were younger, in our 30s. And really, God has called us for a time as this, to stand up and to speak up and to show up and to realize that we are no different than anyone else. We are certainly not inferior, but those messages run deep, which is oftentimes how it is that we end up not living our best lives. And we have something to say. I want to share this with you that I saw yesterday. I don't know if you know Alicia Taylor. She's the head of communications for Mayor Kinney. And her daughter wrote this poem that she posted. I'm going to read it. She's 10 years old. This is to your point about children are paying attention. This poem reads, 1 shot, 2 shots, 3 shot, 4. Another Black man on the floor. An American dream crushed by the law. Around the world, everyone saw. Wide-eyed on the ground, next to Wendy's burning down. 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot, 4. Another Black man on the floor. And that's by Taylor Grace Bard. She's 10. Yeah. And she was just in the car with her mom, and she said, Mom, you want to hear my poem? And her mom said, yeah, I want to hear your poem. Now, her father, I think, he is the chief of police in Cambridge now. They moved from Philadelphia to Cambridge, and she is hearing and seeing everything. You were 4 when you were dealing with that, and I was probably about 10, the same age as Taylor, when I was sitting on the floor watching Roots. And I can remember just as vivid as it was yesterday when Kunta Kinte, when they were beating him and they were saying, say your name is Toby. And I was saying in my mind, don't say it. Don't say it. Stand your ground. And so there's part of me that wanted him not to say it because I wanted him to hold on to his heritage. The other part of me ultimately knew that if he didn't say his name was Toby, that they were going to kill him. And that's the dichotomy of the oppression and the messages and the fear and the worry that we experience, which I think is also why many of us as parents, that we didn't necessarily do all the preparation that we needed for our children because of our fear. Can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the roots piece, because while I grew up in a very traditional yet progressive Black church, and I had sort of the best of all worlds in my raising, I still remember how traumatic Roots was. Because part of the post-civil rights movement message tended to be, we fought for you all are going to make a better world, and things are much better. Let's not look too far backwards, let's look forward. So I can recall when Roots came out, just being angry. And we in Cleveland, Ohio, we went out and we had what we call Roots 2 riots. And I mean, we went running around looking for white boys and we just beat them up. And I'm 12, 13 years old. So I get what all of this was, because there was sort of this approach in the post-civil rights movement: calm down, we get through for you all. Now you all go make a better world. And we, I think on some level, didn't prepare our children for what we knew. Now, we were given tools to fight. And it sort of sounded like this. Now, the world is not fair, so you're going to have to run faster to be equal. Your Black A is a white B, so get an A+. And so there's a whole bunch of us who just super excelled, because that's the message that we were given. This next generation is saying, I don't want to play that game. I don't want to win with those Black respectability rules. I want the game to be fair. And we have to be careful that we're not fighting for mediocrity. It took a Barack Obama for a Black man to be the first Black man to be the president. A white man can be a George Bush or a Donald Trump. The George Bush or Donald Trump equivalent in Black neighborhood is somewhere on a corner somewhere, because they are they're just, George Bush and Donald Trump are just so average, and they are just
below
so
average.
That's right. But we don't have the privilege of being average. We have to be excellent. And this one generation that said, that's not fair. We're not going to play that game anymore. Make the game fair. And so we've got to struggle with that, because some of that is sort of the Black respectability thing that we were raised with that is being rejected by this younger generation. And we have to both hear their voice and they hear our voice, because the answer is somewhere in the middle. That's the stuff that we're wrestling with. What I think we have to make sure is that we hear the voices of the children and not dismiss them. That young girl needs someone to speak to her heart. This younger generation needs to know that we hear them and that we are not totally discrediting their feelings or some of the solutions that they bring to the table.
Right. I 100% agree with that. So when, there's a lot going on, right? So yesterday I was, working, and I saw that they were taking the Aunt Jemima brand off the syrup bottle. It probably is not good for you to get that anyway, right? Or Uncle Ben's, or like there. And I hear in the therapy sessions that I'm in that people are not just struggling in the streets, but there's like radio silence in these suites, right? There's a little blurb that people will say, we're with you, and yet there's not structural change. And I think that people are riddled with anxiety about what is this really going to look like for them. So that's one thing. And the other thing, quite frankly, Rev, is that there are, I see more and more in social media because everybody's on social media these days. So you can see what's going on in a millisecond. Well, there's been several suicides. Josh Waters, who was a writer for This Is Us. You've seen that show before, right? She's a writer. She committed suicide last week. I think she was only 32 years young. There's also been what they say are suicides, but there's been 3 people in the last week that were found hanging from a tree. One in front of Walmart, one in a 20-year-old, and then someone in Florida. It's feeling like we're going backwards in some respects than going forwards. Because I don't know that one. I've not heard a whole lot about Black people hanging from trees in the past. So what's your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, you remember the song Strange Fruit. And I think we need to realize that what happened, again, with our generation, we were raised post-civil rights, and we were raised almost to believe that not only did we win, but the other side went away. I'll never forget when my mother said to me one time, she said, "Alan, I'm old enough to remember colored only signs, white only signs." And she said, "And I'm still here." Now, if I'm old enough to remember the signs, don't you think the people who made the signs are here too? And the reality is the people who made those signs and benefit from those signs are still here. At this point, I think I am safe in saying they are what's left of the Trump support. I am comfortable with saying if you are a Trump supporter, you are part of the problem. Not if you're a Republican, if you are a Trump Republican supporter. And there's lots of them. In my other world of martial arts and self-defense, there's this whole world of white supremacists who are getting ready in the MMA and sort of gearing up for militia and the next fight. I think Black men need to recognize that that is going on, and we live in a state with more militia per capita than any other state in the union. We are dealing with pre-Civil War realities. I think we need to name that. As a pastor, I also believe that what we have allowed to happen is a godless society. And the leadership of a thing will shape the spirit of a thing. And we have allowed a very evil leader and an evil regime to shape the context that we live in. And so part of preparing our people for the future also includes a very strong evangelistic. We've got to get back to God and recognize that, yes, there are other things that are necessary, but we have to get back to God if we are going to clean up some of what we see.
Agreed.
Pastor, once again, thank you for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. Pastor, there's 2 books that were written prior to COVID-19, the 2 pandemics or the 2 viruses, COVID-19 and systemic racism, that I think they're very, very powerful, that sort of preempted this environment that we're in right now. And the 2 books are The Code of the Righteous Warrior and Courageous Conversations Connect, a pathway to have a conversation, all right? And those 2 books really touch on a number of things. Specifically in your book, and I wrote some notes down, but basically here in the intro, you talk specifically about warriors and how they respond to difficulties and challenges in life. And you masterfully connect the dots with your experience as a pastor who's traveled the world, you talk about, and as a chaplain for the FBI. What you specifically touch on, Pastor, is that you talked about how the recession was a sea change. You specifically pointed out that this was a pivotal moment and there was a shift in how we thought. Things around economics and men and how they're being, I guess, having to be forced to think about things differently because the economic pressures and financial pressures, now men were lost their jobs, they're redefining themselves. How do I live in this new world? But what you talked about was specifically about, because of your travels and your experiences, you got a chance, unique opportunity to talk to a lot of white men. And they were faced with, quite frankly, the same challenges we face, differently, but because we're Black men. But you talked about how they were facing some of the same challenges and struggles around, how to become a man, how do I deal with this new demographic, how do I deal with, maybe at one point now no longer being a majority, now being a minority. So I wanted you to kind of unpack that a little bit, because I think that's sort of leading to what we experienced over the past 4 years that brought in this new president that we're experiencing right now. So, and I think that was white rage, and you talk about in your book a lot about that, and to kind of unpack that a little bit for us, kind of understand that.
Thank you for that. And in Code of the Righteous Warrior, what I try to talk about is what it means to be a man, to live biblical principles, but in this modern world. Specifically, as it relates to the recession, a lot of us, if you were raised, you're around my age, and you had a dad that raised you, we were raised to believe that a man was able to take care of his family. Your paycheck should be the bigger paycheck. Your wife should not have to work. And if she does work, then her money should go for the fun stuff and for the children, but you should be able to do that. And that was a big part of provider, protector. In the economic reality that we find ourselves, good men may still not be able to do that. And for families to really get ahead, it takes husband and wife working, and a husband should not define himself by his paycheck over his wife, because the sisters are getting the doggone thing done, number one, and that has nothing to do. Right.
I just called like that.
There it is.
It's real. Listen, I was on top when we first got together, but that first year, I took a nosedive, man.
I hear you.
I came in the game, bringing that in, and at some point things unraveled, and you get in a situation trying to find yourself saying, what do I, how do I redefine womanhood? And you,
that's right.
This hugely, so I'm glad. Go ahead. I'm continue on.
And that's the challenge that men are wrestling with. Right. And added to that conversation, white men have been sold a bill of goods that it is my fault and your fault that they're in this struggle. So what's added to these Trump supporters is they believe that if you and I weren't in the game, it would have never messed up. So not that they're not as good, not that we have something to add, but that we messed up the game and we're taking their spot. And so
they have to compete at a different level.
Right.
They have to compete now at a different level, where the competition, they had a monopoly on that. Now there's so much more now with diversity, and it's a scary time. I mean, if you had power for all your life and all you knew was white privilege and white power, would you give it up easily? No, I think not. You would fight. And I've been sharing this with a lot of people. I mean, not that it's right or anything, but that's just human nature, to fight to protect the privilege. And
that's right.
White fragility comes out of all that. It's a mixed bag.
And that is the issue. And that's why they are afraid. That's why they're fighting back. That's why they have found a mouthpiece in Donald Trump.
Correct.
And that is what that piece is. Hopefully, what we're seeing now, I think he's going to have this crazy rally this week in Tulsa. Right. All of this is waking people up to just how evil and how wrong he is. But whether it does or not, that should say to us, we are in the fight for our lives, and we can't end with just the march. Correct. And if Black men ever needed to be warriors, it's right now. And it's not simply fighting. I in your book, and I thank you for raising that, I talk about Jesus and aggression, because the old idea that to be Christian or to be spiritual is to be a pacifist is not the ethic of Jesus. Jesus was not a pacifist. He was a pragmatist. Jesus dealt with aggression in 3 ways in scripture. One time he ran away in Bethany when they tried to stone him.
Mhm.
One time he took a whip and ran people out of his house or out of his father's house. And one time he said, for the good of everybody, I'm going to let you win. It's a place we call Calvary. A real person, real man knows when to run,
Mhm.
knows when to stand and fight, and knows when, for the good of everybody, I need to let the other side win. And that is what we are trying to train in this moment, because we're going to need an army to win this fight. And every fight is not the front that we fight on, but there are some places that we do not retreat. And then there are strategic times when we let the other side win. And that's the conversation we need to be having with our children, we're having with our men, and with our families.
You know, talk about fight. In part 1 of your book, How a Righteous Man Fights, you tell a story about how your father would always say, son, you never fight an ugly man.
Right.
And you unpack that. That was a metaphoric situation. Well, I guess I don't know. It could be for real. Literally, too. But metaphorically, you talk about, you know, what that means, what your father meant by never getting to a fight with an ugly man, and the decision making of how to determine when to fight, how to fight. And sometimes you got to roll the sleeve, whether it's in the streets or the suites. You know.
That's right. Well, so let me help you. Never fight an ugly man. Do you know that sometimes, well, and what it meant was he's already ugly, so he doesn't care what he looks like at the end of it.
Right.
So a black eye, bloody nose isn't going to make him any worse.
No.
Do you know that sometimes just being in the fight messes you up? Mm-hmm. Whether you win or lose, just being in the fight. Reverend Leroy Miles used to say, never argue with a fool, because if a third person comes up, they won't know who the fool is.
Correct.
You know, there's some fights you don't fight. And that was the whole point. Understanding when and where, because often, and we need to remember this, and one of the strategies that we have seen with Donald Trump, even when he ran for president the first time, no one could fight in the mud because there was no depth that he would not go to. That's why they could not win against him. You can't get into a mud fight with a pig because he loves the mud. We need to remember that there's some places we won't fight. We're going to go to a different arena to fight. Often when we watch the news, Donald Trump will do something so outlandish and get all of us talking about that. And while we're fighting and talking about that, his Senate is putting in conservative judges and we're not paying attention. So instead of going off and fighting him in an ugly mud fight, we need to be keeping our eye on the ball of where the real fight is. So understanding what, when, and where, and how is more strategically important today than it ever has been.
Agreed.
So listen, real quick, we got to pay some bills, so give me a second.
No problem.
We got to do this to take a quick break, and then we'll be back. Quick break from our sponsors. So welcome back. This is Dr. RG, and this is the Courageous Conversations Connect space where we're having our quarantine talks. Make sure that you tag, share this video. Really, you know, this is about our crew, connecting relationships for epic wins. We have my good friend, the Reverend Dr. Alan E. Waller, on having our Courageous Conversations. Morgan and him were just having a conversation about his book, The Righteous Warrior, that was written before all of this, but God has a divine plan for all of us. And then I also wrote Courageous Conversations Connect. So Rev, a couple of days ago, we had Mel Robbins on the show, and I've been on her show several times, and and I hear you saying we can't have the kumbaya moment. You said that in the sermon on Sunday, you know, unless we have a reckoning with ourselves in terms of what we're dealing with. And we talked about the system was the real issue. But when Mel was on the show, she's a white woman
that talked about her embarrassment and her shame. She talked about how she feels, she understands that she is in this for the long haul in terms of anti-racism, right? And she also talked about how she talked to her children, because her children were saying, we just feel uncomfortable talking about this. And her response to her kids were, if you feel uncomfortable talking about this in the moment, how might Black people feel about talking about this for their life? And I do think that those are other conversations that we need to be having with white people if they're willing to have the conversation with us. The problem I find is that the majority of the semi-woke white folk that really weren't that woke are still having some challenges, and the racists are digging their heels in, and they are not having. And those are the ones that are actually in the suites that are really oppressive with their policies and their practices.
That's
so
right.
what are your thoughts about that?
Well, and thank you for that. That's why I think that the woke white people and the dug in racists, they have to have some conversations. They have to have, as a pastor in an urban setting, you often get invitations from white churches in the county. They want to come in and help you feed the poor. They want to come in and help you clean up the streets. And what I'm saying to them, this is a moment where you need to do your own housekeeping out there. I'm not interested in the next big invitation to be the speaker at the next Martin Luther King thing. It's too soon for that. What we need right now is some hard conversations, homogeneous conversations. How do the dug in racist, because the dug in racist tends to be the uncle of the woke white person. I give as an example, many of you have heard about the white man in Passion who was tearing down the Black Lives Matter signs. And he's on video with someone who saying, Black Lives Matter. He says, not to me, they don't. Well, his nephew is a white boy that went to school with Morgan and Erica. And he was mortified that his uncle would do that. And he is trying to have, and that's an internal family conversation they need to have. And that struggle, and we have an internal conversation that we need to have, because what we are wrestling with, again, with our own diversity. Harvard did an implicit bias piece and found that 89% of white people have a white-leaning bias, but also 50% of Black people have that white-leaning bias as well. And we know too well our own internal struggle with each other. Sometimes those of us who are caught in the throes of the systemic racism will see those of us who have made some headway as sellouts, or those that have made some headway will look back at those caught in the struggle as lazy. And we have to have some hard conversations ourselves about affirming the struggle, affirming what does work to get out of it, but affirming our love for each other in spite of what they think about us.
Absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate it. Stephanie says, wicked leadership is fueling the flames of white rage and white privilege. It does come from the top, right? There is a message about that, the white privilege, the white fragility, and even in those conversations, which I appreciate what you're saying, that maybe that uncle and that nephew that Morgan and Erica know, the nephew who's mortified needs to sit his uncle down and say, hey, let's talk about your white privilege. Let's talk about your fragility, that you don't really want to have this conversation because you know that you didn't earn the power and you don't want to share it. You don't want to lose it.
And those of us who have white friends can't let them off the hook, because everybody knows somebody on the other side. And if you have white friends, what you may find is that they're going to start running to you and wanting you to tell them that they're okay. And we can't sell this moment to them cheap because they've been our friends. And we have to be willing to have, when it's time for that, to have those hard conversations as well. Because most of us will know, have been the Black friend, and that they get to go home and say, well, I have a friend named so-and-so, and I have and we can't, because we know that they may fundamentally not be an ignorant Southern racist. We cannot allow them to not see their bias and not see how they have benefited from this system in this moment.
Yeah.
This is a hard moment, and we can't get around the hardness of this moment. But we who believe in God have to know, and I do believe, that this is going to produce a much better world for Corey Lynn, my granddaughter, and it's going to be an exciting world if we stick to it.
Yeah, agreed. That's the key. We got to stay with it. Stephanie says we need to fight with our voices and money, with our votes and money strategically. You know, I was canvassing in Germantown a couple of years ago when we fell short of 40,000 votes or something like that.
Yeah.
And the Black people that I talked to in this community, many of them said that they weren't voting. And I said, do you have children? And they said, yeah. And then I said, well, tell me how it is that not voting is going to help your children, because that's making a decision too. And so I think that I believe, Rev, that love, light, truth, and accountability leads to hope and freedom. And part of that is galvanizing, strategizing, mobilizing, organizing, and voting. This is what our forefathers died for. And that wasn't that long ago. So, you know, I know you're on the board and you do a whole lot about that. Can you speak about how to get us engaged in this fight? Because even in the primaries, the numbers were really low.
The numbers were very low. I think that is one of the galvanizing calls. Not everybody can be in the street or in the room with all of the other changes that can be made. But the one thing that everybody can be involved in is this next push for the presidential election. As we have seen, for instance, as we are watching, there is a national crisis, a national pandemic in a state where people are getting even more sick, and the system has no way of telling this man to not have that. We need to understand that he's not going to go away on a close vote, and he's going to control, even steal the election. And 4 more years of Donald Trump will fundamentally change not just America, but change our concept of democracy. As bad as it was, he can make it even worse. So one of the things that I think we need to understand is democracy matters. It matters to get involved. We hold, I usually wear a hat that says 600K. It's from 2012 when we got Obama elected the second time. 600,000 voter turnout in Philadelphia County will produce the desired Philadelphia result all over the state. We know what Pittsburgh will do. We know what Erie, Reading, we know what the numbers will be. All we have to concentrate on is 600,000 people turning out, and we run the show in Pennsylvania. That's what they're afraid of. The last election, there were 365,000 registered voters that did not show up, and Trump won the state by 44,000 votes. If we just show up, it doesn't matter what any other white group, it doesn't matter what anybody else does, if we just do our part. We have to affirm our own strength. We have to affirm our own understanding of the power of our voice, our vote, and our finances. Selective, you know, there was a pastor in this city before me, and there was Leon Sullivan. And Leon Sullivan pointed the way, selective patronage. Leon Sullivan said, we're not buying your tasty cakes until you start hiring us. And tasty cakes change. That's the stuff. This next phase, this next move is economic. It's getting more people in business. It's doing what you and Morgan are doing right now, and putting businesses in front of people on your show and letting people know where to spend your money. I close with this. My approach to spending my money, I call it QCAB, Quality Christian Enon Black. Quality Christian Enon Black.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Write that down, babe.
First of all, I say, who has the quality? Can you do the thing?
Right.
Is there a Christian that has the quality then do them? Is there somebody at Enon that has it, does it? And is there somebody that's Black? And what I look for is all four of those where I'm going to spend my money. Now, sometimes I'm looking for quality. I can't find any of the other three. I'm still going to deal with the quality. But my goal and my principle, I ain't spending it for quality. My goal is QCAB, Quality Christian Enon Black. And I think everybody needs to have an approach. Where are you going to put your money? Because the next fight is on the financial front.
You know, Pat, I got to squeeze this in. I know you're about to go. We got to let you go. You're a busy man. But I'm just curious to talk about finances and our vote and really apply within the Black community. Can you just briefly touch on the current conversation around sports, and specifically, I don't know if you heard about how, especially in the basketball arena, these guys are struggling with, well, is it more advantageous for us to go ahead and play and put our voices that way, or should we hold back, not go back, and focus on the broader picture, the more important picture, which is a systemic racism? Just wanted to get your quick thoughts about that, if you had any idea about that.
And very quickly, I think we all know the bottom line, this is about money. The owners,
always about
money. And all of this discussion is about the owners are going to make all the money they ever make. And they're not willing to pay, the athletes the same money. Think about this. The first time a game comes on, the owners are going to get all that television money.
Correct.
And people are going to pay because everybody knows, just like watching The Last Dance, everybody's going to watch whatever. Black folk going to be watching hockey if it because ain't nothing else on.
Starving for that competition on TV.
And so the people buying the commercials know that the owners are going to get all of their money even for a shortened season.
Right.
And they want to turn around and not pay the athletes. And so that's a purely economic conversation. And it's about justice. And justice starts right there. If the owners are not willing to be just with the athletes should not play, because that is going to set the tone of every other financial conversation. If we're going to ride it out, let's all ride it out together. But let's not start into this with an upside down financial model.
Got it. Thank you for that, Pastor. I wanted to get your take on it with your thoughts. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, listen, this has been a great, courageous conversation. I thank everyone for joining our crew, Connecting Relationships for Epic Wins. You all know we're here Monday through Thursday, every day at 10 a.m. We've had a courageous conversation with our pastor, Pastor Alan E. Waller. Rev, if there is one thing that you would say, let's say to your younger self, that other children, young people need to know about a time like this, what would it be?
This is a very difficult time that is going to be all right. It's an exciting time to be who you are, because your gift is necessary for the new world that we're going to build. So hold on for the ride, because it's going to be a great one.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Thank you so much. Listen, we'll see you on the other side. Continue to do all the wonderful work that you're doing. We're praying for you and Sister Waller. Happy anniversary. We know that you celebrated your 31st anniversary. So happy anniversary.
35.
30. How many years?
How many years?
31.
Thank you.
31. So enjoy your anniversary week. We love you. We appreciate you. Continue to do the great work you're doing. And we'll see you on the other side. We'll see you Sunday.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.